Hello class, welcome to our next session of IELTS practice. So we're going to continue with part one, so part one of the interview. I just wanted to go over some of the phrases that we learned in the last class as well, just to make sure that you continually try and memorize these very local colloquial type phrases. So things that you could do when you're doing signposting is use any of the following. First of all, for one, first, second. Also, besides that, what's more importantly, but what's more important is that, and there's also the fact that. So these are great listing phrases for you to list the information. Secondly, let's have a look at giving examples and also contrasting. So when you're about to give an example of, they might say, what is your favorite food? You might decide to give an example. For example, take for example, for instance, if or say. Contrasting is looking at the opposite of what you've been looking at previously. But on the other hand, meanwhile, in contrast, returning to a previous idea, anyway, or but still. Clarifying and summarizing. Sometimes when you're explaining something, you might feel that you haven't gotten the information across in the best way. So you want to reiterate or re-say what it is that you've said to make sure that the listener understands. To clarify, you could say, what I mean to say is that, I guess I'm trying to say that. To put it another way, that is, or I mean. When you use these phrases, you cannot repeat what you've just said. You're going to paraphrase it and summarize it in a different way. Also, if you are summarizing, you can use, so basically, essentially, in general, or my main point is that. You might be asked to choose one particular thing, and in order to do so, to introduce what you're going to choose, you could use any of these phrases. If I had to choose, if you ask me, in my opinion, out of all the places, I pick one of the, I can think of this, the first hashtag that comes to mind. So these are really good ones, especially in part one, when they're asking you what is the best or what is the worst of something. You can choose one thing by using these phrases. I'd be very happy if you write these phrases down, clarifying, summarizing, giving examples and contrasting, into a little book, which can be your IELTS book. And while we're practicing, before you do your IELTS exam, you can refer to your book with these phrases to get used to using them for your answers. Okay, so let's look at what is the most important, and this is in accordance with the people from IELTS. So this is in relation to the IELTS examiners and what they have told us is the most important for people to get strong high-level marks, 6.57 up until 9. Number one is fluency. Now, it doesn't mean that you should talk nonsense, but it does mean that you shouldn't stop and start and stop and start. They want to see that you're fluent in your ability to express in English, which means we don't use words like schéma, yes, and we'll definitely avoid any use of any Chinese words, okay? So being able to be fluent instead of, I think, and then being silent, that's going to mark you down, okay? So fluency is really important. The next one is grammar range. So being able to use short sentences or long sentences, using short breaks and long breaks. A full stop, for instance, or a comma for a brief pause when you're expressing yourself. Accuracy. Are you being accurate in how your sentences are structured? Are you using the right vocabulary for the particular thing that you're talking about? A really big one, which I'm finding that everybody has some problems in when they're doing their writing and probably also in their speaking, is using the correct tense. If you're talking about something that's happened before, then we use past tense. If we're talking about something right now, we use present simple. And then finally, authenticity. A big problem that they have said about Chinese students is that many of the students have tried to memorize particular answers to questions. So when they're expressing themselves, they sound a little bit more like either an alien or a machine. This means that it's not an authentic response. They want to see that you can respond immediately to a question because your English is at that high level. And it's very easy for them to see if you've memorized, because many students will use exactly the same answer. Okay, so authenticity is also one of the most important things. Fluency, grammar range, accuracy, using correct tenses, and authenticity. The next document that I would like to show you is what we call the band descriptors. It says it's a public version here. This is available on the internet, but I will see if I can send it through to you so that you can either get it on WeChat so you can have a look. It's the same as when you were doing an assessment event for GAC. We actually provide you with examples of how to get the highest mark. And it's exactly the same here with IELTS. So here we see band. Now, most of you are looking at getting a 6.5 across the board. To get a 6.5 across the board, if you are not very strong in writing and you only get a 5, you might want to really practice on your speaking and your interview technique to get a 7, to come up to a 6, and then finally result in a 6.5. Okay? So all of the results that you get for reading, writing, speaking, and I imagine that there's listening as well, all of those form your final band. For most universities, the level of university you would like to go to, you want to get a minimum of 6.5, okay? A minimum of 6.5. In order to do that, let's have a look at what is required. So we can see the band here is 6, and over here we see the 1, 2, 3, 4 things that they actually require. What they are going to be assessing you in is fluency and coherence. Fluency and coherence, let's have a look, is willing to speak at length. So in the first part, if you answer with just one-word answers, you are not going to respond at length, which means that you will not get a level 6. Though you may lose coherence at times due to occasional repetition, self-correction or hesitation, okay? So they understand that you are willing to speak at length, that you are trying to be authentic in your responses, and that you are speaking fluently in your responses. Okay, so that would be a band 6. But fluency and coherence, fluency, I know that you all know that. Coherence means, does it make sense? So do your answers make sense, and are they structured well? We're going to have a look at how you can expand on the one-word part 1 answers to make them into a full, coherent sentence. If you are hoping to get higher, have a look at the other things that are required to get a higher for fluency and cohesion. 8, for instance, says speaks fluently with only occasional repetition or self-correction. Hesitation is usually content related and only rarely to search for language. So if you pause, it's just going, what is that word again? Oh, juxtaposition, or whatever the vocabulary. Develops topics coherently and appropriately. Appropriately means, have you answered the actual question? I found a lot of times when I ask a question, I'll get an answer to a completely different question. So you need to make sure that we have a look. We'll have a look at that in a moment, making sure we understand the question first. Next, your lexical resources. Basically, really simply, this means your vocabulary. Having a range of vocabulary, using the correct vocabulary. So having a high level vocabulary will obviously get you a higher lexical resource band, okay? So my recommendation in order to improve your vocabulary is twofold. Number 1, listen to as many podcasts as possible, okay? The podcasts, you're going to get some great vocabulary. Number 2, get reading, okay? Whether you're reading something like Alice in Wonderland, 1984, reading anything in English is going to very quickly improve your vocabulary as well as your sentence structure. Grammatical range and accuracy. This is a nice simple one. Just means that you've got complex structures with how you're expressing yourself. Rather than saying a cat sat on the mat, be very, very simple. How are you today? I'm good. Be too simple. How are you today? Well, I'm okay. It's been a little bit stressful because of coronavirus. I'm also 36-year-old and living at home with my family, which can be a little bit frustrating at times because I like to spend a lot of time alone. But at the same time, the sun is shining and I'm speaking with you, so I can't complain. Okay, so that would be a more complex answer to the question using different sentence structures and a more complex structure and flexibility. Okay. Then finally, we have pronunciation. Again, we need to make sure that we're moving and articulating our mouths in the right way. Try not to mumble. I know there's many of you that and no one can understand what you're saying. So make sure that you are articulating yourself well, that you work on your accent. You try and speak in a nice English accent and make sure that you're pronouncing the words appropriately. Now, the best way to improve your pronunciation, also twofold. Number one, listen to English music, listen to rap music and try and sing along and emulate that. The more that you practice your speaking, the better your accent is going to become. Number two, movies and television. Watch the movies and the TV. You're going to start hearing how they pronounce particular words and it's a more enjoyable way for you to practice. Okay, so music and TV and movies. Okay. So just move myself over here. Okay, so the process for answering part one, in order to make it more of a long sentence structure. Number one, you can acknowledge the question. Number two, provide your answer. Number three, expand on your answer. So give it more detail. Acknowledge the question does two things. Number one, it makes sure that you understand what you're going to be talking about. Oh, okay, that's interesting. I've never really thought about my favorite food. So you've acknowledged the question. You've also given yourself some thinking time. So while you're saying that really simple thing and getting a tick from your examiner, you're being very cheeky and sneaky by having more thinking time to work out what you're going to say. So for instance, I might decide, oh, that's interesting. I haven't thought about my favorite food. Oh, well, I suppose it would be pad thai. Okay, provide my answer. So my answer here is pad thai. Now I'm going to go into, I could stop there and get probably a band 2, band 3, but I want to expand. So I'm going to expand and explain my answer. So pad thai. I remember the first time I had pad thai was when I was living in Melbourne and I'd never really eaten very much Asian food before. Pad thai is actually an authentic Thai cuisine that they eat a lot over there and it's so delicious. I love seafood and in pad thai they have beautiful big bright prawns that are flavored with garlic and fish sauce and peanut sauce. On top there's peanuts. It's done with flat rice noodles and it's steamed. The smell is just delicious. It usually has also some little bean shoots and carrots and other things in there and the flavors are just amazing. Every time I taste pad thai, it takes me back to that first moment I had it and it reminds me of Thailand, which is one of my favorite countries to visit. So this really quick question, what's your favorite food, where I could have just said pad thai, I've now acknowledged the question, provided my answer, and explained my answer in more detail. And this would probably get me up to a band 7, 8, or 9. So what we're going to do, before we go into that, I just wanted to let you know that there is no reason that you cannot ask for clarification of the question. So clarification is to make sure you understand the question. When you're going through IELTS interviews, you often get very, very nervous. And when you're nervous, it kind of affects your brain a lot. And sometimes you kind of stop listening because you're so worried. There's nothing wrong in saying, oh, I'm so sorry, could you repeat that? And the person can repeat. Or if you say, I'm so sorry, I don't really understand the question. Again, absolutely fine. They'll explain the question again in a different way, and then you can provide your answer. So don't try and answer it thinking that you might know that it's more important to just say something. You need to make sure you understand the question first, okay? And as I said, it's not going to detract from your marks. In fact, it's a very normal Western thing for people to say. It's like, oh, can you explain a little bit further on that question? It's going to help you, it will calm you down, and you have a better opportunity to answer it correctly. Next, we're going to look at some of the questions which I discussed in the last class, the last IELTS class that we have. I want to give you some examples of high-level answers to these questions in 3 different sections. Okay, so we're going to go through these one by one and analyze them. I would suggest that you have your pen and your paper out and just write some notes about different ways in which these examples, which have actually come from high-level responses, have a look at what these examples have that you could use if you are answering these same questions. So this is for the section of studies. When they do IELTS Part 1, they will choose a particular area and ask you maybe 2 to 3 questions within that area, at which time you've got an opportunity to expand and fluently express your answers. So a quick one, what are you studying at the moment? I'm studying history at university. It's a 4-year course and I started it 3 years ago, so I just have 1 year left. I'm enjoying it as a lot, so it will be sad to finish. So while this person could have said, what are you studying at the moment? And you could have just said GAC, that's the end. This person's actually expressed themselves and expanded on their answer. They've also acknowledged the question because they've repeated the word study. Okay, so you can see that they've acknowledged that they understand the question. What do you like most about your studies? We learn about many things from the past, such as politics and words. But I like learning about how people lived in the past most. It's amazing to see how our lives have changed so much from the past up until now. In some ways, our lives have got much easier now, but in other ways, the simplicity of life in the past made people much happier. Learning about all that is fascinating. So again, they've acknowledged when they've said learn, okay, they've given their answer, they've expanded on their answer, and they've even given a bit of a conclusion. So in both of these, you can see there's a little bit of a conclusion. I'm enjoying it a lot, so it'll be sad. Learning about all that is fascinating. So it shows this is the end of my answer. What do you hope to do in the future when you have finished? Now, this is a difficult question because you need to think about what do I want to do for my job, and you might not know. And so it's absolutely fine to say something like, I'm not sure at the moment. And if you don't have an answer, you can still think of, oh, maybe I could do this. So I'm not sure at the moment, but I may go into teaching. This is why I'm doing IELTS, as I intend to carry on and do a master's in a specific area of history. I'll probably decide for sure what to do when I have completed that. Okay? Let's have a look at leisure time. What do you like to do in your free time? I do quite a lot of sport, actually. I play football mostly on Wednesday nights and Sunday afternoon with a local team. I also play tennis and squash when I can, but I don't really get the time to do them as well every week. I work quite hard at the moment, so I don't get a lot of free time, unfortunately. Have your leisure activities changed since you were a child? Again, you don't have to agree with the answer to the question. Also, we don't have to agree to the answer to the question. If you disagree with something, it's absolutely fine. And this goes toward authenticity. Not a great deal, actually. I used to love football when I was young as well. I played a lot at school. Though, of course, I did other things kids love to do, as going out on bike rides and after school things. Next one, do you prefer to spend your free time alone or with other people? So this should be a really easy one for you to answer. And again, it's about authenticity, you being able to express yourself, who you are, in English. So this person says it depends on their mood. Sometimes they want to hang out with other people and sometimes they don't, but they've expanded really nicely on it. And finally, we'll have a look at books. So what kind of books do you like to read? I like to read biographies. Again, they've acknowledged the question. I'm not sure why, but it is interesting to read about people's real lives, especially when they have had interesting lives and have had to deal with many problems. I do read fiction as well, but I often find it difficult to get a hold of a book that I really like. I also like reading books to do with current affairs. Do you read the same kind of book now as when you were a child? Now you'll notice that this one is actually a question that you might be talking about in past tense. So this would be present tense, and here we're talking about past tense. So when I was a child, but if I did, not I do, it was mainly fiction books such as fairy tales. And they've given some specific examples, which is really helpful as well. What I'm going to do now is we're going to listen to someone's part one. This is a lady from Vietnam, and she got, I think she got a band 8. If I can find the window, just bear with me a moment. Here we go.
So tell me about your hometown. My hometown is here in Hanoi. It's the capital of Vietnam. Most of the speaks essential in country, tourism, economics, and also education of all nations. But what interests me the most about Hanoi is the harmony in architecture. Hanoi has all modern and also ancient colors of architecture. In all parts of Hanoi, nearby the lake, you can find many kind of architectural houses, shops that are left from the French colony, and now in the suburban, we are developing many skyscrapers with malls, office building, and other kind of service companies. So I think that what is the most impressive. Is there anything you don't like about it? As in the progressive development, have numerous drawbacks that I would like to say is pollution. Water pollution, air pollution, especially noise pollution, it comes from congestions. And also, I would like to mention about the overload in hospitals.
Okay, I'll stop that there, just because, let me go back to, she's a little bit difficult to understand, but you can actually see that she's being very fluent and probably speaking for maybe 1.5 minutes on these very simple questions, okay? So it's just an example, and that would be a band 8. Now on YouTube, and I will download more of these for us to analyse in the future, there's a lot of examples of both Chinese students or Vietnamese students that have completed their IELTS on sort of band 8 and band 9, so you can have a look at what they do in order to be successful. So what we're going to do for your class today is I'd like you to get into pairs. So get into pairs, so find a pair, one person to work with, and your teacher should now be able to hand out the question sheets. So I've gone through the questions that many of you have talked about. Sorry, just making sure that you're looking at the right screen. So many of the questions that I've been advised find a little bit difficult to discuss or answer in full sentences. So I've chosen these in particular. Now, there should be enough for one per couple, and then you're going to swap once you finish these onto the next, all right? So what I want you to do for the rest of the class is in your pairs, what are the advantages of studying instead of working? The first person to ask that question, and then just see if they have acknowledged the question, they've answered the question, and they've explained their question. Here you can also provide them feedback to explain to them what they've done correctly, or what they've done, what they could have developed or worked on, okay? So person number one is going to answer the question, person number 2 will take notes and then give feedback. Then the other person will ask the question, answer the question and give feedback, and then move on to the next question. So each pair have 5 questions. If you finish those 5 questions within this class, then I would suggest that you jump into another couple and then you can start answering the next type of questions. Okay, so this is just for us to practice speaking number 1. All right, I'll let you do that with the rest of the class. Thank you very much for your time. As always, I'm on WeChat and available to answer any questions. If you need any, if there are any of these questions that you do find are really confusing, feel free to jump on the WeChat group and ask the question. If we ask them in the WeChat group and everyone observes it, it means that everybody can see the same answer. Thank you very much for your time, and I will speak to you in the next class.